On this episode of AV Week, we recap Zoomtopia 2019, AV technicians and the gig economy, and providing fail-safe digital signage for the AV industry. All that and more next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 426, recorded Friday, October 18th, 2019. It just works.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Crestron and by
Draper, focused on innovative solutions.
And by
AV ProEdge, manufacturer of next-level video distribution solutions.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I just flew in from New York, and boy, are my arms tired. I'll be the host this week, and I apologize in advance. I'm not even quite sure what time zone I'm in. It's been an interesting month. We'll get into some of that. But with me, hopefully to keep me on track, first and foremost, the left-hand side of my addled brain, his name is George Tucker, and he is with us today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And I'm on the time zone deficit myself. I just got back from San Francisco, so.
And his arms are tired too. So we'll bring in
my back.
Yeah. Doug Dillman, who comes to us from Starin Marketing. He just flew in as well just a couple days ago from Zoomtopia. We'll get his 2 cents, but welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Mr. Brock McGinnis, who was the only one of our group who has not traveled this week, so God love him. How are you, sir?
I am terrific. Glad to be on, as always, Tim.
All right, sir. We mentioned Doug. Doug, we'll pick on him, even though he's the first-time guest. His wife has been on tons of time. Other folks from Starin. So, but Doug, you were in in the Silicon Valley this week for
Yes.
Zoomtopia. And if you're not familiar with what Zoomtopia is, it's a gathering of folks of Zoom, the company. Before we get started, Zoom is not a sponsor. We pay for our license just like everybody else. So this might seem like a commercial, but it's not really. Zoom has become a significant player in the AV market, in the UC markets. NASDAQ, their news arm was there live, interviewing the folks at NEAT, who we'll get into that in a second. Zoom is investing in a hardware company for the first time, so we'll get into that. But Doug, as somebody who was there, Starin is a partner with Zoom. You guys had a booth at Zoomtopia at this event. Give me the sense from where you're sitting and where you were sitting this week. What were one or two of the most significant takeaways from Zoomtopia this year?
Well, the biggest excitement, I think, that stirred a lot of questions and a lot of what are they doing now was the fact that they are now actually investing in some equipment. Primarily the NEATs was the new one as a Zoom Room appliance. All-in-one piece that the Zoom really is concentrated on selling licenses, and they've even created a new group of recent. If they go into a large corporate environment, you can sell thousands of desktop licenses, but once it comes to deploying a Zoom Room, now we have to pick some hardware, the interoperability of all of that gear, and does it play nice with the USB drivers of your cameras, your microphones, your DSPs. So that becomes more of a development and design stage and slows down that process for them to sell a Zoom Room license. If there's an out-of-the-box appliance that you just plug in, enter your license key, and away you go, that makes life much easier for them. And the majority of your Zoom Rooms are your smaller huddle spaces to a small conference room. There have been a few appliances out there on the market in the last year, D10 being one of them, and that they were re-announced this year as well. Poly has their new piece coming out, and then the NEATs, which Will be for now is an online ordered all-in-one appliance. It's still in pre-production. They aren't actually shipping it yet, but Zoom invested some money with them to help bring that piece to the marketplace. And it's primarily, I think, just to help them sell more Zoom Room licenses. The larger rooms, your all hand spaces, your training centers and whatnot are still going to be custom designed based around a standard that works with the Zoom software. So it's but it was the first time they've actually invested in helping bring that out, because there are not that many true appliances on the marketplace yet. So,
I mean, that was one of the more interesting ones, the fact that they were investing in it. The other one was Poly for me, and Brock, I want to bring you in on this. Poly, a year and a half ago, Plantronics purchased Polycom, long time, obviously UC and video conferencing company. This past April, what am I saying? Make sure that I'm saying this. Past April, they announced that they're combining the companies under one name, and right before Enterprise Connect under the name Poly. So that's Plantronics and Polycom coming together. The fact that Polycom again is a video conferencing legacy company, making appliances for what could be seen as a competitor, right? What does that say to you, Brock? The fact that Poly is looking at this as a partnership and a good way for them to spend their resources in an avenue that they want to go down.
If you can't beat them, join them. Might be one approach to this. They've made telephones for a lot of other people for a long time. And so that's about scale and momentum and market share, and I actually think that they're really smart in doing it, because most of us love Zoom, and if you can't play with Zoom, you're making people make a decision between your product and Zoom, and now you can say, hey, you can do Zoom for all of your external conferencing, or you can use some of the same hardware to do some higher security internal conferencing, and really only have to buy one set of appliances or hardware to accomplish two objectives. Play with the bring your own device crowd, or and because that, to me, is how corporations are mostly using Zoom, is as an external source, and then continue to communicate with your legacy Polycom gear that you've spent tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars with us on. I like it.
Mr. Tucker, when it comes to this announcement and obviously the rest of the one that happened at Zoomtopia, something that we were talking about before we ever press record on this, at what point does Zoom become ubiquitous? Do they become the proverbial Kleenex or Xerox, or Google even? When does it become, just Zoom me? When do they go from being a company to becoming a verb in the lexicon?
Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. I mean, truly, it's true. I mean, this is the first step. Like, what did we have? We had big corporations that dedicated themselves to very finite lines, the Polycoms and other telecom and teleconferencing companies. And then you had the Crestrons and the AMXs of the world trying to control them and be part of it, and then put out their own product lines. And here comes, what I like to call the virus of free, right? Zoom was free for many users. And then you had corporate licenses for all the add-ons you wanted, but it was fairly cheap. And all those other companies that were with them at all those shows that we saw at Infocom, and the new and developed, right? The new and hot little, what was that little section called? I can't remember. And Infocom, we had a little section of all those little booths of the new
Innovation Showcase.
Innovation, right? Okay, Innovation Showcase. But those are where that's coming from. And this step from just being a software codec to providing the complete solution, I think, is a remarkable idea. And we called it a couple of months ago when we talked on a couple of shows past, where this is where it is. Because what do we always say? You want to rule the ecosystem. And once you rule the ecosystem,
Yes.
you can make profit within that line. And if you become ubiquitous, if you become that verb, then you are definitely going to be able to sell a lot more because the brand identity and confidence is there. And I think that's something that a lot of the big players never really saw coming, is that, oh, it's just this piece of software on a computer. It's a threat, but it's not quality. We can still put in these rooms, and bang. Now you've got an ecosystem that's going to take over, I think, a fair majority of those installs because everybody knows the name. They're instantly going to want it, and they're going to have trust in it.
And it works.
And it works. Yeah.
That's the theme. It just works.
It just works.
You were
Don't
talking
like
about
that
Poly coming in there and the fact that, they're kind of been ubiquitous in the phone market. That was the other large push at Zoomtopia, is Zoom Phone is ready to go, which is, of course, why I think Poly, got the FaceTime with, the execs at Zoom of your hardware can help roll out this Zoom Phone. So there's only a couple of, major players that are, have pretty much standardized if you're just going to do phone, or if you're, versus doing soft phone versus rolling the entire Zoom ecosystem, because they play really nice together. You can walk in with your, from a cell call, as a Zoom call to, oh, hey, I'm now at my desk, transfer it to your desk as a soft phone. Oh, hey, I need to show you something, roll it right into a full-blown Zoom call, and then back to a call. So it's the fact that all of the platforms play together so nicely, and Poly is going to be one of those big players on that Zoom Phone side. So.
It's also interesting that they took that model of, say, Sonos, with the very inexpensive bars that just go in. It's so simple. You can use their displays, you can use the partner displays, but guess what? It just goes in like a Sonos, and you have, again, that brand identity and that technology identity, because Sonos now is known by almost anybody who knows anything about technology, even the passing reference to it. And I think it's just brilliant to do that. It's like, yeah, I get those two models, boom, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Well, and before we wrap up here, I want to point one thing out that I learned this week during Zoomtopia, and that is one of Zoom's programs. They have a certified peripheral program. I guess is the best way to put this, and I'm going to bastardize this, and Doug, correct me where I get this wrong. There were two different programs. One is it's Zoom certified, right? So if you want to use a Bluetooth, headset or speaker or whatever, they're going to certify and say, yeah, that this works with us, right? Fine, no problem. The other one, and this is the one that I find really, really fascinating, and it's very Apple-esque of Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
It is the one where the hardware manufacturers, the peripheral manufacturers, are giving Zoom the ability to update the hardware. So as Zoom updates their software, these peripheral manufacturers are giving Zoom the capability of going into their hardware and updating their firmware as well, or updating the software that runs the hardware at the same time. So it's constantly being updated. So as Zoom updates, so does this other higher level Zoom approved and Zoom certified devices. And so you can have the simple one, or you can have the super, oh my gosh, you're always connected.
Yes.
It's a stack.
And a lot of that came from the initial integrations with PSO, which is Zoom's professional services organization. They take care of that upper level echelon, large rollout, and they have worked with these manufacturers, tested them, so that when a Zoom update happens, it's not going to break the room.
Yeah.
You're not going to wait a week for, we need to update a USB driver. We didn't see that one coming. So they've got their own standard. So there's the Zoom approved, then the Zoom certified, and then the PSO level. This is the only gear we're going to work with. So that adds even another level of it may be certified, but our PSO group's only going to use this one. So
right. It really is an interesting business model, and interesting to watch who is joining that PSO group and getting on board with that one. So, all right, guys, our next story comes to us from our friends over at Commercial Integrator and actually NSCA. They NSCA put together the compensation and released the compensation and benefits report outlining how AV companies dealing with the rising cost of business. One couple of things that they covered in here were raises and honestly compensation for different position levels, different AV levels, but also staff levels. And Brock, I want to bring you in on this when it comes to NSCA's look at the staffing levels. It seems to me that it looks a little lighter than what I expected, I guess. But from your perspective, are AV integrators staffing properly, I guess is the best way to ask this, for the ebbs and flows that happen throughout the year? Or do you think that they're leaning more on services that bring in subcontractors as the needs arise? Are we one way or the other? Are we too much in one camp or too much heavy on subs? Or are we too heavy on staffing up?
Interesting question coming out of the report. I actually had the opportunity to read the whole report, and as an integrator was able to compare us. Because we sit very close to one of the percentiles, and the median staffing level is right about what our staffing level is. What we have discovered, or has occurred in our own business over the last 4 or 5 years, is, however, an increasing use of subcontractors, and a greater and greater proportion of the quantity of projects that we do are in fact being executed by subcontractors. And the reason for that, and I think that Doug will appreciate this coming out of the consulting world, is that so many more of the projects that we're doing are dead simple, and it's a greater dollar volume, it's a greater project number, unique project. And so I think that integrators are still doing their core business with their core staff, but when they're doing Zoom rooms and huddle rooms and simple meeting rooms, they are actually going to market, and it's very scalable, of course, using subs for that kind of hang and bang-ish application. Does that answer your question?
It does. Perfect. Mr. Tucker, something you and I have talked about for years now, and that is the gigification. I think that's the word that you coined a couple of years ago of the AV industry. And you've lived it, I've lived it. There are several folks that we know that have gone, through at least that sort of lifestyle where it's kind of what folks want sometimes. Is that kind of what Brock said when you look at the subcontractor culture? Is it kind of part and parcel of there is this whole section of AV technicians, qualified folks, that this is how they want to work. So Brock's folks can say, okay, sure, then we'll hire you when we need you, and the folks that are working that going, that sounds good to us, right? As opposed to working someplace for 40 years and getting a gold watch at the end.
Well, no, it is true. I mean, look, for someone in the gig economy, well, if you mentioned we both have done in certain degrees, there's a balance between flexibility and freedom and financial stability. And as a freelancer, you can line up enough work that you get done what you need to do financially. Look at it this way. I work union now, but I know a lot of guys who have to work to a certain degree so they can take those 2 weeks off, because the way the checks come in, you have to guarantee there's still checks coming in while you're on vacation, and then hop right back to your 120 hours a week to make up for that until you can get through the process of being stable again. It does help businesses like integrators because they don't have to have that onboarding of the benefits, right? I mean, that's part of it. A contractor is not on your policy. You don't have to give them insurance. You just have to protect them against, injury, which is expensive enough in itself. So there's a win-win on two sides if both parties are really, really into what's going on there. I've seen this happen in the staging business. We go through cycles where companies are fully staffed, and then business becomes so gangbusters that they decide that it's too much weight to have that staff on hand, and they start spinning them off to be contractors and independents. And then 5 years later, the cycle comes back because business has ebbed and flowed, and you want a core staff to do what you need. As Brock said, you have a core staff that you trust, and sometimes those manage your contractors, right? Or they just independents, and then you come back to that. So it can be a win-win, but it's a tough life. I mean, it's like living on the road. You got to know where you're going, and you got to know how to get done. And the problem I have is that as an employee of, say, Brock's, I could probably ask for training and get compensated for that training and have time for that training. As an independent, I've got to meek out the time to get trained and be certified on my own. And therein lies that sort of, balance of, can I get myself up to where Brock's company needs me and trusts me, but I have to make sure I'm not getting paid for that time.
But you are, George, getting paid for that time, because if, for example, you were on staff with us and maybe we paid you $37.50 an hour, whereas if you're a subcontractor, you can command $45 or $50 an hour. I have the flexibility of not having to pay you when I don't need you, but when I need you, I'm willing to pay much more. So, you've got the benefit. What you don't have is a guaranteed 2,000 hours a year.
Yeah, true.
Doug, to Brock's point about Doug was a consultant in a former life before he joined.
Yep.
Does Brock make a point about the fact that a lot of the consultant-driven projects, go back to Zoom for a second, not to pick on them, but the Zoom rooms are pretty dead simple when it comes to both the deployment and the commissioning. Does that lend itself more towards this ebb and flow of contractors?
I think it does, as long as as long as we're talking that conference room, that mid to small conference room to huddle space. Yes, those are very easy, and it lends it, to that model quite well. When you get into the larger rooms that are still incorporating the Zoom, that gets more difficult. You need to have somebody that has the certifications for the DFP, for the programmable mics, and a lot of that equipment that some of your subcontractors are not going to have those certifications.
There's a fine line.
Yes. And in most of if it's a large deployment, you're going to have a mix of them. So it makes it very difficult to say, I'm just going to farm this one out to my favorite sub. You really need to at least provide a project manager to commission the rooms properly. Otherwise, Zoom is all about happiness. Meet happy. So if they don't do it right, you're going to hear about it quickly.
All right, guys. As we wrap up here, last story here comes to us from our friends over at AV Magazine, and story about the Statue of Liberty and their digital signage. The back end of that, if you visit New York and you go to the Statue, there is an exhibit there. They recently completed a $100 million beautification project on Liberty Island. The back end of that is actually powered by 80 bright sign media players. Now, one of the things, and I told you guys here before we started, probably one of the things that caught my eye is the fact that I was in New York this week for New York Digital Signage Week. Great event if you're in that realm and you're interested in digital signage. It's not a bad idea to head over to New York every year or so and hang out with some great folks. We kicked off our coverage at Daktronics on Monday, a couple different streams, but Digital Signage Federation do events. LG does an event. All sorts of folks are in and around New York, including the folks at Brightsign, actually. Mr. Tucker, I'll start with you on this. As digital signage becomes more and more of a vertical and more of a revenue generator for traditional integrators, what are we looking at when it comes to, honestly, back to education, and making sure that these folks understand, whether it's BrightSign or whoever the content management system that they're putting in, make sure that these folks are up to date on what the technology, right, the actual nuts and bolts, the LED or the LCD or whatever they're using for the signage, that part works, but also the back end and the stuff funneling and feeding these displays, that content part, making sure that the folks understand and or at least versed and educated on how these things work.
Well, education, I'm going to tell you, is probably at a loss because we all know that's just eventually we hit the tenured PhD who doesn't want to give up stuff, and that foibles all of it. So, look, museums and these kind of exhibits are that sort of example where they have learned through experience, through tragic events. Even here in New York, we can say 9/11. Several of those museums that were down there, I happen to be one of the maintenance contractors on the Museum of Jewish Heritage, the Police Museum, the Fire Museum, that kind of stuff. And the fact that we had active backups to those systems meant that we could replace them and get them up and running within 3 weeks of that tragic event. So we could have systems ready to go. And I think that taught a lot of those institutions and the institutions who watch them that that's important. Having the latest technology, that's a fight of cost versus it still works. It's a museum. Don't bother me. Until they get a grant or they want something new and they're not having as many visitors, right? That's their motivation. How do I draw more visitors in? Okay, I want the new technology. But the backup side of it, like they're describing here, and the reliability of those units, that's important. Back then, it was the Pioneer DVD and the Laserdisc players, right? Those are rock solid systems, right? We all know them. The 4400, 7700 lines, those things survived all that. And understanding that we had backups for them is what they learned was really important. And when they progressed into building out, say like the Museum of Jewish Heritage and those guys, they put in redundancy systems as part of the bid because they knew it was important. And that's the lesson. Those are the case studies they have to see to understand that yours may not be as tragic as that, but you want to be up and running within a week, or do you want to wait 2 months?
Yeah. Doug, I am going to pick on your former consultant life. Is it something that you can, as a consultant, as a design consultant, you can start putting in and working with the clients and educating them? Say, look, this is something that's important.
Sure. I certainly, as a hardware backup, and redundancies so that you can, replace a piece of gear very quickly. The fact that most of your signage now, your standard sign is basically, cloud-based. So you've got a redundant backup there already. So it's when you're talking about a bunch of $79 sticks on a bunch of TVs, it's getting very inexpensive. It becomes more of a commodity, and the only way to make any money is to get into the content creation side of it. And it's, once it's created, it's primarily loaded to a cloud-based server somewhere so that, you're building that redundancy in and makes it quicker and easier to bring it back up. But since you're a commodity $79 stick or even into the, I like the BrightSign players, they were always one of the ones that they had great specs and you could get to them easy as a consultant. So they went into a lot of places and were pretty universal, but keeping spares of all of that gear because electricity happens.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Absolutely. Brock, when it comes to, designing and maintaining some of these systems, whether it is, ice projection mapping, which you've been involved in, or, something like this Statue of Liberty display, how do you talk with consultant, or how do you talk with the customer about the importance of making sure that there are backups, both of the content, but also the devices themselves?
The discussion is all about what their tolerance is to downtime. If they don't care, if something doesn't work today, if it's not a big deal, if they can wait 24 hours, if they can wait 48 hours, they can wait 72 hours. We're in the middle of implementing a retail store system right now, and they are going to have a spare piece of hardware for every piece of hardware in a 7-figure installation on site. in a cage on site and ready to deploy. And our SLA is 4 hours during their opening hours. So, that's a client that has a very low tolerance. I've got other clients that it's like, yeah, we got other meeting rooms, and we got other this, and we got other that. I think that the most challenging part for a big digital signage implementation is not whether a device has failed or not, but it's whether the person responsible for keeping them running actually knows that it's failed. So there is a monitoring application, and that article didn't talk about what the CMS system is. It didn't talk about the monitoring, but I have to think Diversified's a pretty capable company. They've got a knock or two, and I have to think that part of their contract is ensuring that it hasn't been hacked. There's no blue screen of death. That every one of those elements is displaying what it should be, and that's important as well.
Absolutely. That'll be a good place to stop it. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Mr. Tucker, thank you, sir. How do people get a hold of you if they are so inclined?
I'm on Tucker2s on Twitter. I have some Instagram accounts, that kind of stuff, and some other projects in the works for the new year.
You keep saying that, but I don't,
It's a slow process,
Quality control. Test. Test.
So, all right, Mr. McInnes, thank you, sir.
Always nice to be on here. I'm Brock McGinnis on Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm at westbury.com for the next couple of weeks, and looking forward to coming back again in future, Tim.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Mr. Dillman, thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
How do people get a hold of you or Starren if they are so inclined?
You can get a whole group of us at fasttrack@starren.biz. That is the new group that deals primarily with Zoom. So anything Zoom related, you'll get a whole team dedicated to nothing but Zoom off of that one. Personally, I'm Doug.Dillman@starren.biz, and my Twitter is ConsultDilly.
Very good. I know some of those folks on that Zoom team. So, thank you all so much. For Tomorrow Break, don't follow me on the Twitters. If you have this past month, I apologize about both the Bears stuff and the travel stuff that is winding down as the year goes. Although I will say, if you're in the New Orleans area or you're going to AVWeek's annual leadership conference, I will be in New Orleans for that. So that'll be, I think that and a couple more. So, but more importantly, go by the website if you would please, AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others. While you're there, check out our supporter section. These are the folks who help us financially, help us bring you this program and Resi Week and coverage of New York Digital Signage Week, and in about 3 or 4 months' time, coverage of ISE 2020 last go around in Amsterdam. So all that and more at AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That is all the time we have for AV Week.